I'd like to welcome Dr. Jessica Zanuttini. She's from here, the University of Sydney. So thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. All right, Jessica speaking here. Hello, I am lecturer of Special and Inclusive Education in the Sydney School of Education and Social Work here on campus, and I am going to talk today around using some learner data to offer a few different strategies for us to be using with our higher education students as they engage, and how can we maintain their engagement in group work and collaboration that we expect from them. Now, primarily, I am working with pre-service and in-service teachers and preparing them to work with all students, including those with disabilities. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, including those that are here with us in the room today. I'm going to work as quickly as possible to get through everything that I'd like to today, starting with the nature of collaborative group work in higher education. I'll give you a quick overview of a study that I am right in the middle of at the moment. Some of the common barriers and facilitators of collaborative group work, and many of those I'm sure you are aware of already, and those three different strategies that I mentioned before, particularly looking at speed interviewing for group formation. So right from the beginning, thinking about how we group our students together. Then moving on to team charters, which is around goal setting and holding each other accountable within those collaborative groups. And then right at the end of that collaborative relationship, having students engage in some reflection on their collaboration. So anecdotally, before I implemented these strategies, so I will say that all of this came out of us moving online during the lockdowns. So I had the time and space to think about, okay, how am I going to improve the experiences of students as they engage in collaborative group work that we are expecting them to do, okay? Because previously, in the few years that I taught before the pandemic, we had students having quite a negative attitude towards group work in general. They felt burdened by group work, feeling like it was something that they had to do a lot of outside of class time. There were many reports of this free riding or social loafing, where some people were contributing more than others. There was also an observation that I made, and some students admitting to the sucker effect, which is where we pull back on our personal efforts to make sure that we're not being taken advantage of. So it's like a protective mechanism in group situations. There were also reports of dissatisfaction with the collective grades that they were receiving, some students wanting separate marking, and that typically came out after the release of grades, where we found that, oh, actually my group didn't work very well together, this person did nothing, okay? So I wanted to try and mitigate this situation where we had the negative happening and I had no oversight or insight into what was going on. So the nature of collaborative group work, I won't spend too much time on this, but basically it's a very well-established pedagogical practice. We've been using it since the 1970s quite heavily, and it is expected in most of our units of study, particularly those where we are trying to replicate experiences that they are going to experience in the workplace, giving them practice in how these social dynamics might work as they go into the workplace. We're hoping that they're going to be developing these quote unquote soft skills, things like collaboration and communication. We're also hoping that it's going to be something that's going to produce better outcomes than if students were engaging in a task by themselves. We hope that more people, more heads coming together is going to lead to better problem solving. In some cases, that's just not true. So we do have mixed results of learning outcomes when we bring students together. This could be because of that sucker effect, okay, that I mentioned before. So the research questions that I am particularly looking at is how do students in my unit, so special and inclusive education, how do they perceive and articulate their experiences of group work within the unit? I will say that the tasks, I won't go through the types of tasks that we ask them to engage in through collaboration, but most of them are scenario-based. Okay, and then the second question there is really looking around the facilitators and barriers that they encounter as they work together in these groups. How did I do this? Well, the first thing to do is get ethics approval to do so. And then I managed to download 18 team charters. I never explicitly asked students to submit these, although we did create one in class every time there was a group assignment. There were 131 collaborative statements. This is the reflective part. So at the end of the experience, they wrote their reflection, submitted those, and those were the ones that I downloaded. We have different documents from 2021 all the way through to the end of last year. Content analysis, both inductive and deductive. I'm in the middle of this at the moment. I have done the facilitators and barriers, which I will talk to very shortly. On the screen, there is a table which outlines the years of the uploaded documents that I was looking at, the unit codes that they were associated with. Some of these are postgraduate units in special and inclusive education, and some of them are the mandatory special and inclusive education unit in the undergrad for our pre-service teachers. Team charters, we didn't have many of those, only totaling 18 over the few years. Collaborative statements, what is interesting about the data here is that when we were online, so the first two units in this table show that around 50% and then 36% of the groups submitted this collaborative statement. I was using words like you can submit, okay? It wasn't a requirement of the assignment, it was something supplementary. So when we were online, we did have some of those. When we came back to campus, we had 0 submissions for a little while there. Why? Well, maybe students were acclimating back to campus and perhaps they were not taking on anything that wasn't necessary at the time and they were just trying to do what was required. I can only suggest a reason at this point. So I did change the language that I used to you are encouraged to submit a reflective collaborative statement. And in one case, I use you are expected to, which changed the percentage that we got there. So it's 100% of the groups ended up submitting just with the change of word used on the assessment notification. Now, if I asked you the question, what do you think are the common barriers for our tertiary students when they engage in collaborative group work? What comes to mind? More than happy for you to shout it out to me, raise your hand, whatever you like, or you can use the QR code to let me know as well. I'll give you just a moment to do this and have a look at what's happening online as well. Anybody in the room with any ideas? Scheduling is one online. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Like sometimes students say if they've got a hearing impairment or a vision impairment, it's too hard to explain myself. It's too hard to get the tech stuff. I just want to do this on my own. So
yeah, yep. Ways of working sometimes, our own ways, and we're comfortable with that and the accommodations we make for ourselves. Yeah.
Hi, I hear a lot that they're concerned that they will need more time and that they'll have to disclose to their group why they require more time.
Okay, for their particular part that they've been assigned.
Yeah, correct,
yeah. Okay, great. So online we've got scheduling, managing time. Students not adequately taught how to work well together, absolutely. And that's something that's really important to note as well. We throw our students into these situations where we expect them to know how to work together, how to communicate with others, and how to resolve conflict that comes up. They're not explicitly taught these skills very often. If they have been, that's wonderful. But if not, we need to be taking that role and we need to support them throughout the process. Thank you so much for that. So the common barriers, many of you have come across these in your practice. The time constraints and scheduling conflicts is probably number one when we look at the data. Now, we also have communication challenges and some of those misunderstandings, particularly when we are working with students who are our international students, perhaps. Our workload distribution and contribution can be quite an upset for our students. Conflict, and usually this is referring to interpersonal conflict, not the more productive conflict like we're arguing over how we might present something. The more complex a task gets, or the less structure there is around a task, the more complicated that collaboration seems to be. And then team member absence, which we can't really do much about, particularly when it's based on our students having an illness and being away. It's something we have to work on at that time and see if we can overcome that with some support, of course. Now, some of the common facilitators, we've got open communication that students are asking for. These are the things that work for them. Planning and organization, different ways that we can support that. Positive group dynamics, how can we maintain that? Knowing my individual strengths as a group member and how I can leverage that within the group. Having a review and feedback process inbuilt into that collaboration. And then having something like a team charter or agreed work practices to fall back on. If something does go wrong, or even if we're progressing nicely, going back and reflecting on what our expectations were before that. I mentioned at the beginning that I'll be introducing you to these three things. So speed interviewing is the first one. Speed interviewing is based on the speed dating type formation or method where we're moving students around to talk to each other. Every student within my classes is going to talk to every other student. I'm going to give them facilitation materials. I'm going to give them a recording sheet where they write down the name of the student they're talking to, what they spoke about, and then whether they would like to work with that student or not. These are kept private. I provide these in multiple formats, whether they would prefer to have them as a hard or soft copy. Right before this though, about 2 weeks before, I get students to start thinking about what would you like from this collaboration. Make sure you know the task that you're going to be working on. What are your expectations at the end of this? Once they have that and they have a couple of questions in mind that they're going to be asking their peers, we do this speed interviewing process. I collect all those materials and I look through those and try and put students with their preferred peers as soon as possible, so letting them know very quickly. There is a link here to a Teaching at Sydney article that I wrote about this with a little bit more detail. And there's always also a link to the materials that I use and a guide as well to help you out if you wanted to implement something like that. So what does this achieve as we allow students to speed interview for this group formation? It gives them learner agency over their grouping, which gives them an optimization of choice and autonomy. We have also then preparation and sharing of expectations and goals, which is really important. And this is where we link that to consideration 9.1, recognizing expectations, beliefs, and motivations. We also are asking students to interpret their own strengths and weaknesses, and that's consideration 9.2, developing awareness of self and others. Moving on now to team charters. So this is an example of what I expect students to be producing once they're in their groups. So we formed their groups, now they're in their groups, and we're coming up with a team charter, or another name is something like a terms of reference. Now, This is, I've just covered up the names here, but basically it's saying these are our team members. These are their roles and their responsibilities. This is what we expect in terms of success, what we're looking for, and these are our commitments. So team charters provide us a foundation for shared expectations. It tells us how we're going to collaborate as a group, how we're going to communicate, and what those communication norms are. Perhaps it's also telling us what tools we're going to be using when we are communicating. We then use this as a tool for accountability and motivation throughout the process. So we're describing roles and responsibilities within this document. We're also giving explicit process descriptions, which tells us, okay, in this group, this is how we're going to manage disagreements or conflicts. Within this group, this is how we're going to manage decision making. So we know the process, and we can always use this like a working document and update things as we need to. Now, the team charters are most effective when they're used in collaboration with an instructor. So if we have instructor oversight or at least facilitation of this strategy, then we have better outcomes. So from the very beginning, I give them resources. So on the slides that you'll receive, there are links to different resources that I provide my students with. Some of these are templates, some of them are videos, some of them are examples. They can go on and have a look at these. I talk them through. I spend a bit of time on this to avoid the conflict that I was having within the groups prior to implementing anything like this. From there, I'm going to be encouraging them to go back and have a look at their team charter, particularly if any disagreements or conflicts end up showing their face. So linking this to UDL, it's recording shared goals, which is really important. So consideration 8.1, where we're clarifying the meaning and purpose of goals. The provision of resources that I give them, 8.2, and also encouraging shared goals, commitments, and responsibilities, 8.3. Another one there, very specific to this, is the process for dealing with the challenges and conflicts. So having those process descriptions, and that links to consideration 6.2, anticipating and planning for challenges. The last thing that I ask my students to do is saying to them from the very beginning, saying you're going to be reflecting on your collaboration together. You can do this individually or you can do this collectively. I don't give them a template as such, but I do give them prompts to work through. They can take as much space as they'd like to do this. Again, it's not something that I require from them. So they can make the choice how long it is, if they submit one, and who they submit one with. So some of the questions are, was it a positive experience? How well did your group work together? Did you face any challenges, and how did you overcome these? A couple of quotes from our undergraduate cohort. A nice one that I'll read for you is, overall, our group's collaboration over the course of this task allowed us as pre-service teachers to consider how we might implement similar opportunities for communication in our future classrooms. So it's that idea again that we keep hearing about, trying to model UDL within our classrooms that they can then transfer into their practice as they become teachers. So linking this to UDL, we have an option for individual or collective reflection, and in the pre-service teacher space particularly, we have this idea that we would really like our students to be reflective practitioners. That is true of a few different disciplines, so you might relate to that. So that's consideration 9.3, promoting individual and collective reflection, and encouraging personal reflection that is shared with others, which allows us to represent a diversity of perspectives, 1.3. So anecdotally, before, I don't think I have time to go remind you of those, but quite negative attitudes, where now I'm seeing quite a neutral attitude towards group work because there is more structure. So as soon as I introduce that there will be a group task, I try and bring down those negative emotions by saying, but there will be support for you. We'll walk you through this. You'll be working on it in your tutorials, just so that they know there's support for them. Very few reports ever since about free riding or social loafing. And if there is, we target those during the task, while they're taking part in the task. It's not something that comes up later. I've had no reports of group conflict, requests for separate marking, or dissatisfaction with collective grades since. Again, this is anecdotally, so I will be working on a few different papers that will come out of this, but that's all from me. Thank you for your time. I'm very happy to answer questions. My email is available as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, it's Rebecca again. Thank you so much. You've actually started, there's a lot of comments, a lot of questions in the Slido.
Okay.
So we'll have time for a couple. And I'm just going to pick them out at random because there is a lot. So we'll get those questions to you later. But this one's very interesting. Do you find that your groups are still diverse since using the speed interviewing process? Or do students tend to prefer other students similar to themselves?
Okay. This is a really interesting question, and I've only had one situation in a postgraduate unit where students will basically make a pact that they will put each other as their preferences. I do not like that situation. I would prefer the diversity, and in most cases, we do have a diverse allocation of groupings. In the past, I have selected students and tried to mix up, backgrounds or experiences and things like that. But this, in my cases, except for one unit, yes, I have had diversity in those groups.
Another question about diversity. So, and this is combining a couple of questions. So where there's students who have significant social anxiety or communication needs or whatever it is, how do you stop or how do you prevent those students with diverse needs becoming isolated during this process?
Okay, I will have to think more hypothetically about this. It's not something that is too obvious in the classes that I have taught. The only real time that has happened where there's that opportunity for some isolation is due to language barriers. I think that's the biggest one that comes up. Otherwise, groups are really good at bringing each other in. I mean, we provide a lot of support that this is what we're going to be working on, this particular task that's going to help you with your group task. So there's structure around everything that they do. So it's hard for somebody not to contribute or not to be a part of that conversation. I am there. I always tell my students that I am there to be a mediator that's not involved in that group, and I can be that impartial person. So there's always that option as well if they feel like they're not being included in the same way everybody else is. But I will say most of the groups are formed around what they hope to expect at the end of that task. And usually that has to do with grades. So they're more interested in what other people want to achieve. Are you a pass student or are you striving for a HD? And that's usually how they're grouped. So they're usually working with like-minded in terms of expectations and achievement, what they'd like to achieve. Yeah.
There's so many questions here. Logistics, more questions about diversity, but this is a good one as well. Are there implications if a student breaks their group charter? What is the consequences?
Yeah, and it's more of if you're familiar with like a restorative justice type process, so it's not about being punitive in any way. It's okay, so your group is not meeting the expectations or commitments. What's going wrong and how can we fix that? And if it's something quite significant, it's usually happening outside of the situation and it's quite a personal circumstance, and we may need to make adjustments based on what that particular student is going through. Yeah, and that's going to have an impact on the rest of the group. but we need to take care of that case by case.
Thank you. We've got time for just one more question, and this is a logistic one that I'm just really interested in as well. What is your class size? Can this be implemented for like classes of over 400 people?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Very good question. So my sizes range from, you know, very small, like 10 students, to around 28 to 30 students. Yeah. So we're not talking hundreds. There might be hundreds in the unit, but once they go into their tutorials, they're a lot smaller. So this becomes more manageable in the sense that we can use the speed interviewing. I haven't tried speed interviewing with hundreds, no.